Hello, and welcome back to another one of our Facebook Q&As here at the State Paper. I'm Bristow Marchant, reporter for the paper, here to talk to you today about our elections and what you can and can't do, should and shouldn't do, voting this year in the June 9th primary in the midst of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. So I reached out to my friend at the State Election Commission, Chris Whitmire. He's their director of public information. And as he was just telling us, he can talk all day about how elections work, how people vote, and all the ins and outs of doing that in such a stressful period to be operating an election. Chris, you were talking about it's stressful anyway, trying to organize a statewide election, but the coronavirus just adds a whole extra layer to what you have to do over there. Talk a little bit about what is being done now to safely hold the primary next week and keep voters safe while they're doing it.
Sure. The coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic has affected all of us, and really all businesses, government agencies, our private lives, all facets of our lives, and certainly elections is no exception. And, early March, when this began to spread across South Carolina, we did become concerned about how to conduct an election in a pandemic. Our elections are required by law to be conducted in a certain way, and that requires people to gather together in one place, which is something that is not a good thing, something that health and public safety officials are telling everybody not to do. So there was an intrinsic problem with how to conduct an election in a pandemic in a safe way for voters and poll managers and everybody involved. And so we've had a few changes along the way that have helped with that. And one of those is that legislation was passed a few weeks ago by the General Assembly, signed by the governor, that makes every voter in South Carolina qualified to vote an absentee ballot. And that was a huge change. It's never been done before. Prior to that, you had to meet one of 18 reasons. You 65 and older, have a disability, be on vacation, your job keeps you from going to the polls. Those are some of the reasons you had to meet, but you had to fill out an application and swear that you meet one of those reasons. And not everybody met one of those reasons. So there was no reason for self-isolating in a pandemic. So that legislative change made it so that in a declared state of emergency within 46 days of any election, then that created a new reason that every registered voter was qualified before, and that's reason 18 now. And so that has helped, and it's resulted in a tremendous number of absentee voters. So I'll give you a few numbers to put that in perspective, and then I'll talk about absentee and another change with absentee, and then I can also talk about what we're going to do on election day. But it's been a tremendous absentee turnout so far. We've issued over 200,000 absentee applications, though approximately 135,000 have been returned. We've issued about 130,000 absentee ballots, and of the ballots issued, about 68,000 have been returned. And those numbers are from late yesterday. And of course, absentee voting is still going on, and we'll go on through the rest of this week up until Election Day. We can talk about those dates and deadlines in just a minute. So to put that in comparison, the record number of absentee ballots cast in a statewide primary was about 60,000. Well, we've already issued 130,000 absentee ballots, and over 200,000 people have taken that first step of getting an application. So we've blown the record for absentee participation in a statewide primary out of the water. It's totally unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. Now, how does that compare to a general election? Well, in the 2016 presidential election, that was the last record-setting election for overall absentee. Over 500,000 people voted absentee. So we're not going to get there. But what's interesting about that is that in past elections prior to coronavirus, most absentee voting occurred at the office, where people go down and vote absentee in person at the office. So in 2016, when 500,000 people voted absentee, only 140,000 of those did it by mail. So 360,000 were voting absentee in the office, only 140,000 by mail. And so looking at our numbers now, 80% of the absentee voting that's going on right now, over 80%, is by mail. So it's been a complete reversal of how people are doing it. And that makes sense because by mail is the safest way to vote in a pandemic. And so we could set a record for by mail absentee voting in any election in a statewide primary, which is amazing because statewide primaries usually have lower turnout. It's usually less than 20%, and there's just not the volume of voters to be setting records like this. But a lot of things are different in the coronavirus pandemic, and certainly absentee voting, the rate of absentee voting and how people are doing has certainly changed. And so the other big change that happened is there were several court cases. One of the federal court cases was ruled upon, and the judge ordered that voters do not have to get their signature witnessed on the ballot return envelope. So when you vote absentee by mail, when you package your ballot back up to send it back, you have to sign the voter's oath, and you have to date that voter's oath. That hasn't changed, but prior to this court ruling, you also had to get a witness to witness your signature and date it and put their address on there. And so there was an issue with that, well, some people are self-isolating, they may live alone. It's not fair that they would have to go and expose themselves to get a witness signature. And the court agreed and ruled that the witness signature is not required. So that has helped some people. And then for election day, we're taking steps to try to make the polling place as safe as possible for everyone. Poll managers will be wearing personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, face shields. There'll be sneeze guards at the check-in table. There'll be social distancing in place with marks on the floor 6 feet apart. There'll be hand sanitizer. Poll managers will be cleaning surfaces throughout the day, both on the voting equipment and the tables and doors and that sort of thing. And so voters will also, the process will be a little bit different. There'll be a couple of things. One is that when you go to check in, when you're handed your ballot card to go put it in a ballot marking device to mark your ballot, you'll also be handed a cotton swab. And that cotton swab is for making selections on the touch screen, so you don't have to touch the screen behind all the other voters that have touched the screen. So we're asking voters to use that cotton swab to make the selections on the touch screen. There'll be a trash receptacle. You can throw that away. They're cheap, they're disposable, and they work really well. So if anyone's in need of a stylus and doesn't want to buy an expensive one, a Q-tip or a cotton swab works really well. So we'll be doing that. Also asking voters to bring a pen. If you don't have one, they'll have pens there, but if you bring your own pen to sign the poll list, that'll keep us from having to clean those pens afterwards, and that will help. And then also we're asking voters to wear a mask at the polling place. Poll managers are going to be wearing masks and other personal protective equipment. So we ask voters to do that too. It is not a requirement. You do not have to wear a mask, but we just ask that you do to protect the managers and the fellow voters. So I see we're getting some questions, so I'm happy to take some of those.
Yeah, Chris, let me throw some of these to you. Jilda Hill on our Facebook page is asking if there's a number she can call for assistance if she has any questions, can't find her polling place, that sort of thing. Where can voters turn if they need some information?
So scvotes.org is where I would send you first, right there on the front page. And that's one thing I left out about polling place on election day is that due to the coronavirus pandemic, some facilities have told county election officials they won't be allowed to use the facility. And we've lost a considerable number of poll managers because poll managers, many of them are 65 and older and fall into high risk categories, and have said that, it's not worth my risk to my health to work the election. And we understand that, and we've done a lot to recruit new poll managers, but the bottom line on that is the loss of facilities combined with the shortage of poll managers has made it so that county election officials have had to either move some polling places or consolidate polling places. And there's more of that in Richland County than any other county. So long story short, before you go to the polls on election day, you should go to scvotes.org, click Find My Polling Place, and make sure you know where you're going to vote. Your polling place may not have changed. Most of them haven't. And when I look at it from a statewide perspective, most polling places have not changed, but a lot of them have. So every voter should go check their polling place before going to vote. And assistance with any other election matter, the best place to call is your county election office. You can go to scvotes.org and click Contact My County Office, and then click your county, and it'll give you the contact information there.
Pamela, I'm going to go with Eddie Huss is asking about getting an absentee ballot, and I've seen some other questions in there about that process and obviously getting it through the mail. Kind of walk people through how they can do that and what are these kind of effective deadlines for being sure you do get it through the mail and you can get it back in time to have your vote counted. So
you have three options: by mail, absentee, in-person absentee, and then voting at your polling place on election day. I'll talk about by mail first. We're a week away from the election. If you need to vote absentee by mail, you need to act now. Like as soon as you get this information, log off and go do this, because absentee by mail requires, but it's a two-step process. You have to get an application, return the application, get your ballot, and then you return your ballot. Some of that's done by mail, and it takes time for mail pieces to move through the Postal Service. And so there is still time to do this by mail, but you're almost out of time. So you need to act today. And so the easiest way to do that is, if you have internet access and a printer, is to go to scvotes.org, click Get My Absentee Application. You put in some information about yourself, and you'll be able to download your application, your voter specific application. You print that out, sign it, then and then you need to return that to your county voter registration office. You can email it back, scan it and email it back. You can fax it back. You can mail it back. Again, you want to get that to them as quickly as possible, because they got to get that to send you the ballot. So if you can avoid mailing it, that's great. And so to find email addresses and fax numbers, again, go to scvotes.org, click Contact My County Office, and you'll see the email addresses, fax numbers, phone numbers, and all of that there. So once you return that application, they'll mail you a ballot, vote the ballot according to the instructions, package it back up, and then either mail it back or personally deliver it back to your county voter registration office. Or you can also send somebody else back with your ballot. But if you do that, there'll be a form in your package that's called an authorized returnee form. And so you have to complete that form if you're having somebody else carry your ballot back for you. So that's absentee by mail. Again, if you need to do it by mail, act now. If you don't have internet access and a printer, call your county voter registration office right now. They'll mail you an application. It's probably going to take 2 days to get it. You'll get it on Thursday. You're going to need to either email that back or fax it back if you're going to try to complete this by mail. And then, you wouldn't get a ballot until Saturday. You'd have to get it right back in the mail, and your ballot has to be back by 7 p.m. on Tuesday. So, there is time to do it by mail, but you have to, you would want to get your application online to cut out that step. And you would also want to return that application electronically to cut out that mail step. That way you could actually get your application in today to the office, and they can mail you your ballot today or tomorrow, and you'd have it in plenty of time to also be able to mail it back. Now, there's a lot of risk in that process I just described because we're so close to election day. So let me talk about the other two options. The other two options are absentee in person, which is really easy if you can, and if you feel comfortable doing that, go down to your county voter registration office, take your photo ID with you. You'll apply right there at the desk. They'll give you a ballot card. You'll go over to a ballot marking device, mark your ballot, and then put it in the scanner, and you're done. So, and they'll be doing all of the things at the absentee precinct that I described earlier to make the polling place as safe as possible. They'll be wearing the personal protective equipment. They'll have hand sanitizer and social distancing and all of that. So they'll be taking steps in the absentee precinct to make that as safe as possible too. And then if you can't do that, then your third option is voting at your polling place on election day.
Pamela Bender has a question about an advisory question on the ballot. I believe this is on the Republican primary ballot, asking whether voters support being able to register by party. Currently in South Carolina, you register to vote, you don't register as a Republican or a Democrat. And I know some political parties would like to have that kind of information on hand. Can you kind of explain the mechanics of that and what it would mean if South Carolinians suddenly had the ability to identify with a party?
Sure. So right now, voters are just voters. There is nothing on your record that says you're a Democrat or a Republican. So that's by law. We do not have registration by party, and we have open primaries, meaning, and that's why when you go to vote in a primary, the poll manager is going to ask you, in which party's primary do you wish to vote today? They're not asking you, are you a Democrat or Republican? They have to know which ballot to give you. So this is one of the things we get on election days. Why are they asking me if I'm a Democrat or Republican? It's none of their business. Well, the only reason they're asking you is they have to know which ballot to give you. They just want to know which one do you want to participate in. And so, yeah, we don't have registration by party. Many other states do. The advisory question, political parties are allowed by law to put advisory questions on primary ballots. Both the Democrats and Republicans have had them in the past. This year, it's just the Republicans. They are exactly that. They are advisory questions. You're basically telling the party how you feel about this issue. What the party does with that information is their business, but it's not binding. It's not like a constitutional amendment question, which could result in the Constitution being amended. It's not that. There's nothing binding about it. It won't change the law. It's simply like a survey question that's on the ballot. If the General Assembly saw fit to make South Carolina, to change the law and have registration by party in South Carolina, we would certainly accommodate that. It can be done, but that is a political question that really is in the hands of lawmakers. And to add to that, what it would mean if one thing it could mean is that you would have to, when you register, you would have to claim a party. There would have to be some process for changing that if you ever wanted to change it. And it would also mean that primaries would be closed, so that if you weren't a registered Democrat or registered Republican, you couldn't vote in a primary. So a registered Republican couldn't vote in the Democratic primary and vice versa. So that would be one of the effects of having registration by party.
I'm going to jump down to Betsy Ford's question, because I think this is something that confuses a lot of people. She voted in the Democratic presidential primary in February. Does that mean she can't vote in the Republican primary next week? Talk about how those are different.
So your participation on February 29th in the Democratic presidential preference primary has no impact on your ability or your qualification to vote in either of the primaries in June. So they are not connected at all. So you could have voted in the Democratic primary on February 29th, the presidential primary, and then if you choose to, you could vote in the Republican primary on June 9th. Has no bearing whatsoever on your ability to participate in either of the primaries on June 9th.
And I think, as you said, the only restriction there is you can only vote in one party's primary at a time. So you can't. Correct. And I think that also means if you vote in one party's primary next week on June 9th, and then the other party has a runoff 2 weeks later in June 23rd, you also can't cross over and vote in the other party's runoff, correct?
Great point. So, yeah, you can only vote in one party's primary at a time. So on June 9th, you'll have to make a choice. And there are some counties that don't have a Democratic primary. Voters in some counties only have one choice. And I think some of those counties are Beaufort and Aiken, and there may be a few others. Those are two that I remember. But there is no Democratic primary in some locations, in some precincts. Some people don't have a Democratic primary to vote in. So there's some people who go to the polls and and they'll just say, you'll be voting in the Republican primary today, because there is a statewide Republican primary. So that option is there for everyone. But whatever choice you make, you can only vote in one. And then that does lock you in for the runoff. So on June 23rd, if there's a runoff and you're eligible to vote in a runoff, you could only, let's just say you voted in the Republican primary on June 9th, you would be limited to any Republican runoff you might be qualified for. You couldn't switch back over and vote in a Democratic runoff, even if there was no Republican to vote in. You can't switch back and forth.
I'm going to go with Betsy Ford again. She has a follow-up question. She's not received the absentee ballot. She requested 2 weeks ago. What should she do?
So I would suggest two things. One is you can go to scvotes.org and click check my absentee ballot. And that will allow you to see in our system whether or not the county, that you can see the date they issued your application, the date they received your application, the date they issued your ballot. And then once you get your ballot and return it, the date they received your ballot. So that's one way that you can get some information on whether or not your materials have been received or mailed back to you. The other thing is to call your county voter registration office and ask. So I would certainly be concerned if I returned my application 2 weeks ago and have not received a ballot yet. So there's something wrong there. It could have gotten lost in the mail. It could be some mistake with election officials. But the bottom line is you should definitely check into that today.
All right. And Gilda Hill, who we talked to earlier, has another follow-up question. She says she's going to be out of town. Can she still get her ballot through the mail? And I don't know how far away she is, but talk a bit about the mechanics of that. If you're traveling, can you get it, and you are not at your home address, can you still receive an absentee ballot?
Yes. So you can have your absentee ballot mailed to you wherever you're at. And that's really around the world. So, we have South Carolinians who live overseas. We transmit ballots to them all the time. If you're on vacation out of town in the United States somewhere, it does add some complexity to it in that you have to have a place to be able to receive mail, which sometimes traveling can be difficult. And there's only a week left, and I sort of went through that process earlier where there's a lot of mailing that takes place, and the farther away you are from your home county, the longer it's going to take to do that by mail. But if you're not going to be back in South Carolina, you're away. The only thing I can tell you, and you're not coming back on election day, is to try and to speed that process. Get your application online, print it out, email it into the county voter registration office. Then they're going to mail you a ballot. Hopefully it gets to you quickly, and then vote that ballot as quick as you can, get it packaged back up and get it back in the mail system as quick as you can.
Kay Kuntz has not really a question, but a point that I think you can reiterate. She's saying that if your voter cannot get their ballot in the mail in time to be there on election day, she says that you can take that ballot to the county election office prior to that 7 o'clock deadline when polling closes, correct?
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you, Kay. Is that if you're trying to do this by mail and you get your ballot, but you don't either you don't have time to mail it back, or you don't want to risk mailing it back, because there is a risk mailing your ballot back with just a couple of days, just a few days left, because it has to be back to the office by 7. So you can take it yourself to the voter registration office. And I like that because it keeps your vote in your hand. You know it got there. You took it there yourself. So if you can do that, if you feel safe doing that, then I recommend doing that and taking it in and dropping it off. You can also send someone else with your ballot, but to do that, you do have to fill out the authorized returnee form. It comes with your ballot. It's called the authorization to return absentee ballot. I believe that's what it says at the top. And so you would fill that out, and then whoever is bringing your ballot back would also fill out a section of that. And when that person brings your ballot back, they would be bringing it back all sealed up with the signature on the outside and everything. And then they have the form not inside. My point is, don't put the form inside the envelope, because the election officials can't open that envelope until the day before the election. So they need to keep that form outside the envelope, take them both back, and you can have somebody else return it.
Dwayne McLemore, who is one of our editors here, is asking, how many poll workers have we seen drop off, especially older folks who are concerned about their health, obviously? And you talked a bit about some of the changes you're seeing at polling places earlier. I know in Richland County, we've seen a large number of polling places have been consolidated, and that potentially could cause some confusion. Yeah, if you want to respond to that, just talk a bit about some of the precautions there.
Hundreds of poll managers throughout the state. It's a very fluid situation, so it's very difficult to say exactly how many. But at one point, based on information that we collected from counties last week, statewide, it was about 1,500 poll managers short statewide. Now, we believe that number has been reduced over the past week or so. So I don't think it's that many anymore, but it is a significant issue, and has caused counties to have to consolidate polling places. And Richland has done more of that than anywhere else. At one point, Richland was 400 short, then they were reporting 350 short. I'm not really sure where they're at today. But the impact of that is the consolidation of polling places. So if you're voting on election day, it is extremely important to go to scvotes.org, click Find My Polling Place, and check to see where your polling place is for election day. It could have changed. Now, county election officials will be doing some other things. We're also mailing cards to voters and households in precincts where the polling place has changed. So you may get a card in the mail that says, for this election only, you'll be voting at this place. There'll be signs up at polling places that have been moved. Of course, election officials are sharing that with traditional media, sharing it through social media. So they're doing a lot of things to get the word out and to make sure that voters are able to find their polling place. But my simple message to voters is to, before you go to vote on election day, go to SC Votes, click Find My Polling Place.
Chris, with all the absentee ballots, this historic number of ballots you're going to be receiving through the mail this year, do you worry at all if the office staff there at the election office are equipped for that? I know a lot of government offices have been working staggered schedules. They're trying to practice social distancing too, and now they're about to get overwhelmed with envelopes. So do you have any concern about that, and what can be done to kind of help them out?
Yes. So I guess the first point to make about that is that county election officials are dealing with an unprecedented amount of absentee by mail ballots. Traditionally, most of absentee has happened in person. And when you vote absentee in person, there's not all of the envelopes and everything that you have to deal with. And basically, you've already scanned your ballot. It's been processed. By mail, there's 2 envelopes to open, and the ballot has to be scanned. So processing one absentee ballot takes much longer. One absentee by mail ballot takes much longer than an absentee in person or a polling place ballot that's been cast. So what does that mean? It means that it may take longer to count the votes on election night. And the point I make about this, it has nothing to do with the integrity of the election or the accuracy of the election, but it may take longer on election night. I think this will vary from county to county. Some counties have a higher rate of absentee by mail than others. Charleston has a lot. Richland has a lot. We can't start opening those envelopes until 9 a.m. on the day before the election. And at that point, we can only open the outside envelope. Then you have all of your ballot here-in envelopes and the ballots inside. So then at 9 a.m. on election day, election officials start opening that ballot here-in envelope, removing the ballots. And then they start scanning those ballots. And it's possible that they're not done with that on election day. It could go into the next day in some places. But again, and we've done some things to try to help with that situation. The legislation passed recently that helps a little bit. That process I mentioned of opening that first envelope at 9 a.m. on the day before, that's new. We used to had to wait until 9 a.m. on election day to start opening anything. So the General Assembly gave us that to where we can do that first step at 9 a.m. on Monday. Also changed the in-person absentee process where we don't have to put those in an envelope. That's a long story, but that helps a little bit too. We've deployed some extra scanners out there, the ballot scanners that county election officials use to tabulate the votes. And then work with counties to make sure they understand that they're facing a new task here and making sure they have the space available. You know, where are you processing this? That your normal place, maybe if you're a small county, the conference room table might not be big enough. You may need to find another location where, you know, you can spread out, apply more people to doing this task. And so we've been talking to county officials about that. You know, how long it'll take remains to be seen. When we look at the numbers, we could have as many absentee by mail ballots that were as were cast in the 2016 general election or more, and that was a lot. And it could be more than that. So even in November of 2016, some counties struggled to get that done on election night. So it could be a long night in some places, and it could go until the next day. So we're just asking for patience when it comes to that.
Real quick, I see Kay has another clarification. The ballot that you need to take to your county election office, they can't take that at your precinct. You do have to actually take it to the election office, the county admin building, or wherever it might be located where you live.
Thank you, Kay. You're hitting all of the points that I wanted to make and I was forgetting. So a lot of people are voting absentee for the first time and may not understand the process. So your absentee ballot has to be returned to the county voter registration office. You cannot take your absentee ballot to your polling place on election day. Some people may think that that makes sense, and that, you know, hey, poll managers are there, they're accepting ballots all day long. Why can't I just take my ballot there? Well, the answer is the law says you can't. So you can't do that. The poll managers are trained not to accept an absentee ballot at the polling place. So if you have your ballot in your hand, you have to, or at your home on your kitchen table or your counter, and you haven't returned it yet, you got to get that to your county voter registration office by 7 p.m. on election day. You can't take it to your polling place, and you can't just go vote at your polling place, because if you go vote at your polling place, they're going to say you've been issued an absentee ballot. You have an absentee ballot. I can't issue you another one here.
Well, real quick, I think we're running out of questions here, but I did want to ask. We're talking about the election next week, but in November, it's a presidential election. You're going to expect to see much higher turnout than we're going to see next week, and at the same time, we don't know if we could see another outbreak in the fall or winter coming up. Are you concerned at all about what steps might need to be taken to ensure the general election in November can go off as smoothly as it can?
Yes, we are. And, you know, the November presidential election is going to be a completely different ball game because, you know, turnout in June primaries is usually 20% or less, somewhere in that range. Turnout in a presidential general election has been over the past several anywhere from 68 to 76% turnout. So completely different ball game, a lot more absentee voting, and absentee voting has gained in popularity. Setting coronavirus aside, absentee voting has been on the rise for the past 20 years, and there's more and more every year. You put coronavirus on top of it, regardless of the situation in November, I don't think that we as a society will stop being concerned about it anytime soon before November. So there'll still be some concerns in November, and people will want to vote absentee. And then also, so many people have experienced voting absentee for the June primaries. They may like it and say, you know, wow, this is a lot easier than trying to go to my polling place during that 12-hour period on election day. I'm going to continue to vote absentee. So yes, we expect high rate of absentee voting in November, and we are looking at applying additional resources to that process before November to help county election officials. One question that still remains is whether or not The emergency reason will be in effect for November. Right now, it is not. The legislation that was passed expired on June 30th, or expires on June 30th. So currently, that is not in effect for November. The General Assembly could come back and change the law again. And if that were to happen, again, that would add to the numbers because it would increase the number of people who are qualified to vote absentee. So yes, we're concerned about that. And that'll be, I believe, the one of the biggest challenges going into November.
All right. Well, Chris, I think we've kept you long enough. I'm sure you have a lot to do heading into Election Day. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and answer everybody's questions today.
You're welcome, and thanks to everybody who sent in a question. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks everybody once again for tuning in, asking your questions. We hope this was helpful. We're planning to do a lot more of these on various subjects with various people. So please do continue to tune in. Thank you.